are in the country today. This is Kevin Keto with 911 ETC, and I'm joined today by Michael Anderson, our National Sales Director. I am the Director of Sales Development. Today we are going to be talking about E911 planning for Skype for Business / Link if you're still using the older system. There's a lot of different challenges that come along with Skype for Business and Link, in that Microsoft did a lot of great things when they developed the product, but they also kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and we'll get a little bit into that a little bit later on in the webinar. If anybody has any questions, we will be answering questions at the end. Just please type your question into the bar on the right-hand side, and so we'll be answering all those questions at the end. And we really appreciate it. Last time we did this, we had a tremendous amount of questions, and we're looking forward to that as well. Presentation should take about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and then probably the last 15 to 20 minutes will be all questions. Okay. So I just want to go over a brief agenda here. We're going to talk about E911 overview just to make sure everybody's on the same page. It looks like we're having some people that are have been on some of our webinars in the past, but there's a lot of brand new people, so we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. We'll talk about the VoIP environment, configuring ELANs and URLs, and describe what ELANs and URLs are. And then what kind of subnet level or switch port level discovery you're going to be doing when you're talking about voice over IP phones, and then call delivery. We'll also talk about the challenges that come with off-campus endpoints when it comes to Link. Like I said, there's a lot of different things that happen with Link and Skype for Business that are really important and different than really almost every other PBX. And then we'll finish it up with the NETA model legislation. Okay. So what is E911? Basically, when you dial 911, you're at home. The 911 operator is going to get your home telephone number and your home address. And that's really important because we've all heard of stories of people who've dialed 911 who couldn't speak, or maybe even children who dialed 911. I've even heard of pets being able to dial 911. This kind of hits home for me because my nephew, when he was about 2 years old, he dialed 911 for my older sister who was diabetic and she was having some problems. We kind of taught him, if mommy doesn't talk to you, go over to this phone and pick it up and dial 911. And pretty much everybody thinks that that's the same kind of experience you're going to have when it comes to dialing 911 when you're behind a phone system. But the difference is when you dial 911 behind a phone system, the best case scenario is the 911 operator is going to get the address of the building that you're in. And that's okay if you're in a one-story building and everybody easy to find you. But when you start talking about multiple floors or maybe multiple buildings at a campus, that's really not good enough. You really need to have that extra level of location information. And that's really what Enhanced 911 is. It gives the pinpoint location of where that call is coming from, and also will direct that call to the correct service in PSAP. Because one of the issues that's come forward lately is a flat and consolidated extended environment where you have maybe one core location and you have sites spread all over the country. Calls can actually come back to that one core location, and if that were to happen and somebody were to dial 911, rather than that call getting routed to the PSAP that services the caller, maybe they're in New York and their core switch is, say, in Houston, Texas, that call is going to go back to Houston and then get routed to a Houston 911 center. So it's really important that E911 is implemented, especially in those environments, because it's not really a nice to have anymore. It's really an absolute imperative because we want to make sure that that call gets routed to the correct servicing 911 center in a proper amount of time with the right location information. Another big part of E911 is including on-site notification to make sure that people on-site are notified, hey, 911 has been called, and give them the right location information where that call is coming from. And that's important because rather than just knowing that, hey, police, fire, ambulance are showing up at the front desk, 911 was 911 called and who called, we can actually get people to direct emergency personnel to the emergency, or maybe even send people to that emergency ahead of time. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is setting up ELANs and URLs. And what an ELAN is, it's an emergency location identification number. And what an URL is, it's an emergency response location. If you just think of an ELAN as a phone number and an URL as a zone or a specific location, that's really the best way to think about it. And there's a couple different ways that companies will set up ELANs and URLs. The first method is just setting up actual down to the desktop level granularity. And what that is every single endpoint would basically be its own ELAN, or have its own phone number assigned to every single switch port. And this is what some companies will do who are in states that have legislation that say you need to get it down to the desktop level granularity. state of Florida, state of Louisiana both say that your system must be capable of doing that. And then there's other companies that just say, you know what, we want to get it all the way down to the switch port because our environment is so small and is diverse. We want to make sure that every single individual switch port is identified within the system. And the next level of granularity, I'm going to actually be turning this the conversation over to Mike Anderson. He's going to be talking about ELINs and ERLs and the zoned approach of granularity within the E911. So Mike?
Thanks, Kevin. So generally the way our customers set up E911 is by a zoning concept, as Kevin said. And in this particular scenario, this person broke up their 2 floors into an east and a west wing and assigned a unique phone number, what we call an ELIN, to it. Within Skype for Business, it has the capability of assigning a unique phone number to a zone or a location. So even though there might be 20, 30 phones on the first floor, you would only actually load 2 unique records in the 911 database for each floor, so 4 total records here. So if anyone picks up their phone on the 2nd floor and goes to the 1st floor west wing and dials 911, it's going to send out the 555-0001 number that correlates to the location of where that person is. So once you set up those zones, you don't have to update the 911 database unless you added a brand new location to the database. So you can allow people to move about all they want, and all it's doing is just updating the call server to say which phone number needs to be outpulsed when that person or that device dials 911. Next slide, Kevin. So now routing of the 911 calls is also very important. A lot of our customers come to us and say that we have a core phone system or call server in one location. In this particular scenario, this customer has a core data center in Atlanta, Georgia, one in Portland, Oregon. It has multiple locations hanging off of it. And set up what we call PSALI in all these various regions and pay the carrier to get access to the various 911 databases they'd have to log in and update to. But for the VPC solution, it can be a centralized 911 database, so you're only loading one database. And we can now also take those calls and route them to the appropriate PSAP. So if you have just remote IP phones hanging off of a core system in another state or another county than where the call server resides, you can actually route those 911 calls to our voice positioning center. Since we have the ELIN provision in here, we know where it's located, so we then know which PSAP we have to actually ultimately deliver that to. So it gives you 1 point of entry for the database and 1 point of routing for the database. So it makes it very simplistic, especially a lot of our customers that are consolidating everything to cores and then routing those calls out. In the past, some customers would put POTS lines out at these remote locations or in a gateway. The POTS line is great, but it just gets you to the location. If there's specific legislation in that state that says you have to get to a square footage area, that makes it very difficult. So we found that this is probably the most efficient and easiest way to handle remote locations that are hanging off of a core. Next slide, Kevin. So the way this all looks in a data flow is you obviously, first of all, we take the data from the Skype for Business and we load that into our voice positioning center. And generally, it's the ELIN and ERL information. Once you assign the phone numbers to the locations, we take that information and we provision it in our voice positioning server. So the IP discovery already comes inherent with Link, which is a great thing that Microsoft did because, or Skype, is because you don't have to have an external device or something that does the tracking of the IP phones. You set it up internally, an ELIN to each ERL, and as people are moving about, that they've moved and then updates to what phone number needs to be outpulsed in the event they dial 911. So a 911 call here, this person's on building floor, 2nd floor, room 221. The one challenge is that Skype is designed kind of it was over-engineered to actually work in a next generation or NG911 environment. And in that environment, we'll be able to send what we call PITA flow to the 911 operator, basically a URI or a URL in a SIP header that they'll be able to click on and get floor plans, heat sensors in a building. I mean, they'll be able to get a lot more information than they can get today. But unfortunately, I think there are only 2 PSAPs right now in America that can actually receive PIDFlow and do something with it. So what has to happen is we have to take that PIDFlow information and convert it back to an ELIN, which there are different media gateway companies out there that you probably all know of, but they can provide that media gateway that will convert that PIDFlow information back to an ELIN. In fact, some of our partners that do sell Skype for Business will not even deploy Skype without one of these media gateways because they understand that sending PIDFlow to the PSAP doesn't do you any good. So once we've converted that PIDFlow back to the ELIN, that 555-1234 number, that is now delivered to us via SIP, or it can be over a PRI. And we'll take that call. Since we provision that 555-1234 number in our database, we know which PSAP we then have to route it to. It'll actually first go to a selective router, which then will go to the PSAP. And the PSAP will just get that ELIN. They'll dip into the ALI database, and up will come whatever location information we provisioned, which is 1234 Main Street, building floor 2, room 221. Now, remote offices work very much the same as if someone was in the enterprise or where the call server resides. It'll still to an ELIN. So we've basically assigned a unique ELIN to that remote location, and so we have it's a one-to-one relationship between the ELIN and the location. That phone number, once it's converted from PIDFlow to the ELIN, it will come to our voice positioning center, and then we will send it to the selective router nearest to that remote office, which will then go to the PSAP, and they'll do the lookup and get whatever that address of that remote location is. Now, the one challenge with Skype for Business is, and this is not unique to our solution, this is unique to this is just an issue with Microsoft and the way they've developed it, is currently if you're working from home or you're a highly mobile soft phone user, we can't set up ELINs and URLs for home office or soft phone users. It just doesn't allow that capability. So what it has to do, it just is going to send PIDFlow all the way to our voice positioning server. And unfortunately, we don't know where we could possibly read PIDFlow, but there's no reason in sending it to the PSAP because they can't do anything with it. So what we actually have to do is we send it to an emergency call center. Emergency call center, they're all APCO trained 911 call professionals, and this emergency call center has the ability to transfer this call to any PSAP in North America, Canada, and the United States. So that emergency call center APCO trained 911 call taker will then say, where are you located, and then transfer it to the appropriate PSAP nearest to that home office or that soft phone user. Hopefully that issue will be resolved sometime in the near future, but it's a Microsoft issue, and it's not an issue with our solution. Because everybody out there in the industry that does enhanced 911 has to do the same thing with those particular instances. So it's not the best solution. It's not the best way to do things, but that's all we can do with the technology that exists today. So some of the things that, NENA, who's the National Emergency Number Association, came out with some guidelines for multi-line telephone systems. And one of the key things, which some of you probably heard about with Kerry's Law, is that allow all 911 calls to go out either 911 or 911 or whatever variation of 911, because someone might be visiting your location, or in the instance of Kerry's Law, there was a young girl with her mother and her sister at a hotel. The estranged father came in to the hotel room and started, attacking his wife. The young girl dialed 911 repeatedly and kept getting a fast busy because the hotel made you dial 9 and then 911. And unfortunately, her mom perished, and that got a lot of visibility out there. Most hospitality hotels and lodging associations have now embraced it. They've gone in there and made that fix, but there are still, private companies that still have 911. You want to make sure that no matter what they do, they're able to get out if any iteration of 911 is dialed. Also, to allow all company phones to call 911. I've heard of some companies where they restrict 911, and that presents a lot of liability if you're doing that. And most companies don't do that any longer, but I've been in those 15 years, and I do recall many instances where companies did do that. You also want to provide precise, accurate location data to the 911 operator. In some cases, it might just be the address. That's fine. If it's a small building, one floor, someone shows up, they'll find the person right away, then that's great. But if you're in a multi-story building or multi-buildings at an address like a campus, you want to make sure you identify at least, the building and floor. And if the floor is, gigantic, if the Sears Tower or something, you might want to break that out into quadrants. I always just say it's kind of a common sense thing. It can collapse. How quickly would someone find you with the information that you're presenting to the 911 operator? Another key component, I know that not everybody has security or first responders on site, but if you do have people that can actually get a notification internally or on-site notification to actually go wait at the door to escort emergency responders as they arrive, I mean, that's ideal because, your first responders know your building. They know how to get there the quickest to where the emergency is. So if you can provide that level of notification internally, which Skype does give the ability to send notifications internally to security or maybe people who are trained on CPR or whatever it might be, it's good to notify people internally so they're not, surprised when emergency responders show up. You don't want to make sure there's no local termination of the 911 calls, meaning that if you have multiple locations, you want to make sure that's going out to the right PSAP, not just to the PSAP nearest to where the call server resides. And then they also recommend that you test calls twice per year just to make sure everything's working correctly and everything's doing as it should. Next slide, then. So now there are actually 19 states with E911 legislation, the latest being Pennsylvania, which just came out with some legislation in the last few months. And so more and more states are. We're finding that California is probably going to be the next to implement. But if you look here, you can go to our website at www.911etc.com/legislation. And you can click on any of the ones in red actually have legislation. The ones in light blue, there's nothing or no pending legislation. In the dark blue, there is pending legislation. But you can actually go to our website and pull up the actual legislation as it was written and a brief synopsis of that legislation. I know we're not attorneys, and all attorneys, they interpret your internal legal team and get their thoughts and input as well, because you look at Florida. Florida says you must get down to the desk. You must be able to get down to the desktop. And I have had customers interpret that as, well, I'm able, but I'm not going to because it doesn't make sense. And other customers are like, no, we have to get this down to the desktop. So other customers, we found, since each state, unfortunately, there's not a uniform legislation like Washington State says you must get to 25,000 square feet or per floor. Illinois, the longest standing legislation is 40,000 square feet. Virginia is 7,000 square feet, where you have to have that ERL, that emergency response location, be 7,000 square feet or less. So some of our customers who have locations throughout all the states, they just meet the minimum requirements in that state. Others kind of standardize on the most stringent legislation, like for instance, they'll do everything to 7,000 square feet, even though because Virginia is the most stringent, and even though Washington might say 25,000. They'll just get it to a 7,000 square feet, so everything's uniform across the country. And that's something we can talk through with you and help you with as well. Next slide. So, I mean, that's pretty short and sweet. It's like, just to kind of recap, is that you obviously need to get access to the 911 database. You need to realize how are you going to route those calls and make sure they get to the proper PSAP. How are you going to do IP discovery, which obviously Skype allows you to do that internally. The capability already exists within it, and providing good on-site notification. Those are kind of the main points that you really need to consider when implementing E911 with Skype. But it can be quite simple and not that complex. You don't have to make it very complex. All the capability exists within Skype. You provide the ELIN and URL information, load it to the database, you route the calls appropriately, and generally, unless you add any new, brand new locations, there's nothing for you to do. So with that said, we'll take any questions you might have, and we'll do our best to answer them. Kevin, you want to just read them off, and we'll try to get through these?
Sure. Yeah. One of the first questions that we have or came on early on is, does a VoIP vendor have the ELIN-URL capabilities, or is that an outsourced service you provide? So I guess what they're asking is, do PBX vendors, do they set up the ELIN-URL information, or is that something that we would do?
In terms of programming the phone system or the call server or Skype, that would be your vendor. That you would work with them to determine, to program what we call the ELINs to the URL locations. Generally, it's done via subnet, so you could basically assign a unique phone number to each subnet. That's generally how this is implemented. So the vendor will help you with that, but on top of that, you need to get access to the 911 database, first of all. And if you have multiple locations in multiple states, you'll want to go with like a VPC vendor. And then how are you going to route those calls to the appropriate PSAP? Do you want to put in a local PRI wherever you have phones, or do you just want to route them from a centralized location? So those are some of the things you have to consider.
Cool. I have PSALI already set up, and I moved to SIP. Why doesn't E911 work anymore?
Great question. Yeah, this is something we're seeing more and more where our customers had PSALI, which is the old way of doing enhanced 911, and then they move to a SIP provider and don't tell us, and we get a call saying, hey, our 911 is not working. Well, the SIP providers generally, and I don't want to blanket statement every single one of them, but most of them will just deliver the 911 call to the appropriate PSAP. They will get it to the right PSAP, but they'll only get you to the address. So if there's some requirements at that state, they won't get it to square footage or floor or anything like that. And the way SIP works in delivering the 911 calls, they don't access the PSALI data. Different. We have heard in one area, oh, actually, no. Yeah, so that's just why. They're accessing a different database. So when you do move to SIP, something you have to consider is, make sure that they confirm, yes, I can not only get you to the address, but can I get you to a floor? If you have multiple floors in a building, or can you get it to a square footage? Can I get south and north quadrants? Most of them will say no. And that is why you need a VPC vendor that, such as us or a few others out there that do what we do.
Okay. Next question is, it's kind of a long question, so I'll kind of make a synopsis of it. It's basically saying that they have a large Wi-Fi implementation of soft phone users. The phones move, minute by minute. How can the information be automatically updated via Skype when they are on campus?
Well, when they're on campus, generally what we do is just the ELIN-URL concept, but you assign a unique ELIN to that access point. So someone, is connected to an access point, they dial 911, you assign a unique phone number, and you assign the location of that access point. So we can only get to a general area, and obviously if you're running out of the building while talking, that's not going to do you any good either. That's just technology right now. That's the way we do it on all phone systems. We assign a unique ELIN to the access point. We take that ELIN and the location of the access point, load it in the database, and we can get to that general area of where that access point is right now.
Great. What gateways do the PIDFlow to DID translation?
Well, two of them that I know that some of our customers use, I know Audio Codes and I know Sonos both will do this. There might be others out there, but I think that's generally the majority of the implementations we've done have been either Sonos or Audio Codes.
Okay. Is there a setting within Link or Skype for Business where I can turn off PIDFlow information? So basically, it's like, I guess they're asking, instead of having the PIDFlow information go out, can they just have the caller ID go out instead and not having to worry about the gateway?
I wish. That would make things a little bit simpler, but no. I think Microsoft developed this so they wouldn't have to go in there and make changes to it as technology evolves. So they just kind of went as far forward as they could because they know it's coming. But next generation 911 is still probably 5-7 years out because it takes money to upgrade all the PSAPs in the United States, and states keep rating that funding that's for 911. When you look at your bill, you see that 911 tax. Well, generally, states go and raid that for other uses instead of upgrading the PSAPs and what they should be using that money for. So the answer is no.
Got it. Okay, let's see here. If the calls are routed all the way to your cloud, how long does it take for them to answer the call, figure out whatever they need to figure out, and then get the call routed to the local PSAP?
Well, boy, that's a variable depending on what that person, if that person's freaking out and are they being concise and explaining where they're located. I mean, it's a matter of less than a minute. I know that, but it just depends on what how quickly that information is conveyed to the answer taker. I mean, the emergency call center 911 call takers are actually trained above and beyond what the normal PSAP operator is. They're all trained in CPR and they're EMTs. They can actually explain how to administer CPR and things like that. So they're like a level above your general PSAP call taker. So it just, obviously every situation is different. I mean, it could take 15, 20 seconds. 911, what's your emergency? I'm having a heart attack. We don't show your location. Where are you located? I'm at 555 Thunderbird Road, Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, hold on one moment. Let me transfer you to that PSAP. That would take 10 seconds maybe, and then.
And Mike, those are only for calls that route to the ECC. For the ones that are on-campus users, those ones, they just bounce off our server, and there really is a negligible delay.
Yeah, no, we did a large implementation with a very large company that everyone has heard of, but I can't mention their name, that they did a lot of testing in terms of how long, they were like, wait a minute, so I'm routing a call to you and then sending it to the PSAP. They were worried about how long is that call going to take to get to the PSAP. And if just a normal call within the enterprise, not a PITA-flow call, but we're getting the E911, it's the same amount of time as a regular 911 call today, or if you just called from your home and dialed 911. They did a lot of testing on that, and there's negligible difference in terms of the time it takes to get to the PSAP.
Got it. And then there's actually a lot of questions just about discovery. They want to get more information about IP discovery and configuring the company via switches or by subnet, and then asking about E911s and ERLs, where are they created from. And then the last thing is about access points. And, if you're on a, we've talked about this before, where if you're in a building and you're connected to a wireless access point, you could actually be on the second floor and pick up an access point on the first floor. So how are those things handled?
Well, I'll address the last question first. That's just technology. That's all we can do today. I mean, Wi-Fi technology and access point technology is getting much better. We don't get the bleed from floor to floor as much. I know some of our customers haven't deployed this with some of the latest technology, and they don't get that issue. Or I think they call it bleed, where it goes from one floor to the other. So that's just a technology issue. We only can do what technology allows us to do. So that's all I can mention in that regard. For deploying an IP discovery, it's generally via subnet. So you need to order a batch of DIDs from your provider, or however many URLs that you're going to have, emergency response locations. Let's just say you just have a 10-story building. You just need to get. You'd have to have 10 unique DIDs, valid 10-digit DIDs, and you would assign it to each floor. Because generally each floor has its own subnet. Some buildings they'll have 2 subnets per floor, or maybe even 4, depending. But in most cases, it's via subnet. You just assign that unique ELIN that you have, the DID, to each subnet. That's the way, so far, that we've deployed it with all of our customers. And in fact, with other phone systems, it's the same thing. I mean, we pretty much all do it via subnet, and there's certain cases where we don't, but in most cases, it's via subnet. And that might mean you have to reconfigure your subnets. I mean, to be honest with you, I know it's not something, the IT folks want to hear, but, if this is a public safety, this is a safety issue for your employees, and, what's more important.
Yeah. And, that's the issue with, if subnets are spanning multiple buildings, then you do need to have a clean network map. So there is a way to do it via switch port level discovery. There's a couple more questions about that, about how customers have, they have a subnet that spans multiple buildings. You're in trouble if that's the scenario. But really, you can do it via switch port level. The issue with that is you have to have a super clean network map. And then also, going forward, it's kind of a little bit, you have to put some rules in place where if somebody goes and moves a switch port or whatever to a different zone, they need to update the database and say, hey, this is over here now. So it's a little bit easy. It's a little bit more difficult to manage going forward. So that's why most customers will end up reinventing their network and saying, hey, we're going to do a subnet per floor.
yeah, cable management becomes very important if you're doing it that way. That's no doubt.
There's a couple of questions on calls that route to the ECC and asking what if the person cannot speak, then what happens?
Then we're in trouble. I mean, honestly, we're in trouble. That's why I always say the on-site notification piece is very important, because you can
you're cutting out a little bit every once in a while, so for some reason I can't hear you.
I apologize. Well, can you hear me better now?
Yes, yes.
So that's why I say that on-site notification is so important. I mean, that's a technology issue. PITAFLOW sent, we can't do anything about that. So the only scenario this would occur, obviously, with a soft phone user or someone working from home. But in the event they cannot talk, the emergency call center does not know where they're located. We do not know where they're located. The only person that could possibly help them is if you send an internal notification to, someone else saying, hey, Bob just dialed 911. And even though, they're working from home, at least if you're working in the office and Bob, you can maybe call his cell phone or, hey, is everything okay? Or that's as good as we can do right now with the technology that exists, unfortunately. And that's not just us, that's everyone else that does E911.
Actually, that dovetails really good into the next question. It's about on-site notification, and is it what type of on-site notifications can we provide? And then also, is it possible to have a on-site responder listen in on a call via Skype for Business or Link?
Well, I believe you just get you can get the extension, you get the URL location, and the ELIN. And listening in on a 911 call, this is something that has come up a lot lately, but there are a lot of states where, first of all, you have to notify both parties that you're listening in, and that's actually delaying the 911 call. So first of all, you have to put in that recording, this call is being monitored, so which you do not ever want to delay a 911 call, first of all. Second of all, there are HIPAA regulations out there about health and privacy issues there. So if you're listening in on a 911 call and someone's talking about their health problem, that could present some liability for you as an organization. So I don't recommend it. I know there are some customers. Definitely something you want to run by legal, but there are recording devices or companies out there that or listening in devices. That's something I just don't recommend. You can probably do it, but there's a lot of legal issues that arise when you start doing that.
All right. The next thing is, were there significant advancements provided in Skype for Business over Link 2013 besides PITAFLOW? And I could actually jump in there and answer that. Actually, PITAFLOW has been part of Link since its inception. So if you have even the first initial Link deployment, an older Link system, it was Outpulse and PITAFLOW right at the beginning. And that's why Mike was saying that they kind of jumped the gun a little bit on outpulsing that information, because next generation 911 is still a ways out. Let's see the next question. If a nationwide company doing business in multiple states were to rule their own dispatch center, how difficult is it to manage and keep up with PSAP changes? So I'm guessing that's saying that the calls are going to be routed to an internal dispatch center for when 911 is called. I think that's what the question is.
Oh boy. I mean, I know like some universities and things like that have their own internal PSAPs. That's something that I probably need. That's a question for probably our operations folks who deal with the PSAPs on a day-to-day basis. If you have a question like that, you can certainly just send it to me, and I can route it to the people who actually deal with the PSAPs and data on a daily basis and all that. So I could get you more information, but that's not really my expertise, and I don't want to I don't want to say something incorrect. So I could certainly help you if you want to send an email to us, to Kevin or myself, and we can certainly look into and get you back some feedback from people who actually know what they're talking about and about that issue.
And that's one thing that actually is it's a little bit frowned upon to route calls to an internal dispatch center. If you're doing a full-fledged PSAP, like an actual, that's like what Mike was saying, some universities will have full-fledged PSAPs where it's just like a county PSAP where they'll be able to get information just like if it was a county PSAP. That's okay, but if you're just routing it to an internal dispatch center, that's really frowned upon, because you have to make sure that somebody's always there. There's liability issues, if the call gets routed to that place and the person may be in a different state, how are you going to get that call routed to the right place? There's a lot of challenges that come along with routing 911 calls to an internal security.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it really puts all the liability on you, I mean, as an organization. So anything goes wrong, they're going to point the finger at you, where if you're doing 911 to the actual PSAP, you know, the way the legislation is written is as long as you can't prove gross negligence, you'll never be held liable if something goes wrong. You know, technology is not 100%. I mean, I was having trouble on my computer earlier this morning. I didn't know if I was going to make it to the webinar. So, you know, sometimes technology fails, but as long as you're not negligent, then you can't be held liable if something goes wrong for 911.
Okay. Next question is, how do you handle callbacks in the event the 911 call is dropped? How do you map an ELIN back to the specific phone like Cisco does with CER?
Yeah, all phones, Avaya, Microsoft, Skype for Business, that's all the same, whereas if you call back that ELIN, I don't know what the actual amount of time, the default amount of time is, but someone calls back an ELIN after a 911 call, just like Cisco, Avaya, Skype, it'll actually redirect it back to the last 911 caller's extension or DID.
You know, and there actually is some debate on where that call should actually be routed back to. Should it route back to the last person that dialed 911? Because the only time that they're really going to answer that phone is when, Mike? I mean, the only time they'll ever answer that phone is with a misdial, right?
Probably. Or, yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously they collapse and are laying underneath their desk. They're not going to answer the phone on a callback. That's for sure. Yeah, there are some talks that you should have.
Yeah, you should have those calls route back. Yeah, actually to a main security desk or something like that, or maybe somebody who's on the floor who actually could answer that phone. So, you know, there's some debate. And again, that's an organizational decision on where you want that call routed back to. But there are some states that actually say that you have to route it back to the last person that dialed 911. So, you know, there's a lot of debate on where that call should actually go. Let me see if I got all the questions. There's anybody else has any other questions? Please feel free to send them in there. We'll keep it open for another couple minutes here. If there's anything that I might have missed. I think that is about it. Unless anybody has any other questions, I think we can actually wrap the webinar up. We'll hear another minute here or so, see if anybody else has anything. And everybody, there will be a recording of this out. Yes, actually there's a question, can we get the presentation? Yes, there'll be an actual recording of the webinar that will be sent out to everybody who attended, and you can download it for free. On that last question, it says, how would you make the callback change? So basically, what we're saying there is, if you use ELINs that are actually assigned to somebody, like say like a security desk or somebody on the floor, then that call, instead of routing back to the last person that dialed 911, it'll actually route back to that extension that ELIN is assigned to. So that's how the call will get routed to somebody other than the last person that dialed 911. And it's the same with all the phone systems, whether it's Cisco, Avaya, or Link. Basically, just have to assign somebody that extension, and that their ELIN becomes the phone number that gets called back. If there's any other questions? Oh, it says, can you spell the protocol that was mentioned earlier? It's PIDF-LO. And it's pronounced pitiflow. It's just the way that information is going to be sent to the PSAPs once next generation is available for companies. I think that may be it. Oh, and by the way, pitiflow, just so you know, it stands for Presence Information Data Format Location Object. So it's another great acronym in the E911 world. And actually here, I'll go back to, somebody still asking about it, how the pitiflow is done. Let me go back to one of those slides. Here, if I go back to this slide here, you can just see it's PIDF-LO right here. All right. I think that is it. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining. Again, we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar, and thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.